everyone! For this activity, we were asked to make modifications to the original Bristle bot we created. During the Ask phase, we started off with a few questions. The first was, how does the Bristle bot work? When you complete the circuit for the motor by attaching each wire to an opposite side of the battery, the vibrations for the motor make the Bristle bot move. The next question was, what are the essential parts of the Bristle bot? It's mainly made up of the brush, the battery, the motor, and then the decorations like the eyes and the legs. We were also asked to think about what modifications could we make and what materials could be used for redesign. The big question that I wanted to find out more about was, how can I make the Bristlebot move in a more controlled manner? During the Imagine phase, I mainly focused on figuring out what modifications I could make to the essential components that might affect how it moves. For the motor, I figured I could use a different size one, either smaller or bigger. For the brush, I could also change the size, but I could also change the bristle shape or the motor and battery placement. And then for the battery, I could choose a higher or lower voltage battery. Moving on to the plan phase, I decided that I would do multiple tests modifying one part of the Bristlebot at a time using materials I found. I found a toothbrush that had a smaller base and that had more wavy edges than the original one, and I also found a higher voltage battery. The original battery we were given was 1.5 volts and this one was 3. For my first test of the create phase, I followed the given Bristlebot directions. It moved pretty sporadically all over the place and it didn't really have any consistent patterns. For the second test, I swapped out the batteries. This made the Bristlebot move more consistently, but it just spun in circles. It didn't really go anywhere. And then for the third test, I went back to the 1.5 volt battery, but used the different brush. Because of the ripply bristles, the Bristlebot just fell over and then spun in place. I wasn't really happy with any of these designs, so I went back and did a little bit more research. I came across a Bristlebot activity on the PBS Design Squad page, which explained a little bit more in depth about how the Bristlebot moves. It related it to a pogo stick and said that in order to move forward, it needed to be able to tilt forward to move. After doing a little bit more research, I went back to modify some of my designs. So that it could tilt forward more easily, I cut the bristles on the smaller toothbrush into a slope, with the motor on the lower side of the slope and the 1.5 volt battery on the higher side. This one seemed to work pretty well. It moved in a smooth pattern and it made the same size circle over and over again. For the second test, I switched the motor and the battery placement. Because the battery was heavier, it couldn't tilt forward to move, so it just spun in place. Then for my final test, I switched out the battery and the motor back to their original spots, and then I used the 3 volt battery instead of the 1.5 volt. This seemed to work well, but because the battery was so big, it made the bot a little bit lopsided, so it didn't move as consistent or make as consistent circles as the smaller battery did. It also fell more often. After testing 6 different versions, I found the Bristlebot that moved in the most controlled manner was using the smaller brush that had sloped bristles, and then the placement of the motor should be on the low side of the slope, and the 1.5 volt battery should be placed on the higher side. This version of the Bristlebot seemed to move in the most controlled manner because it made the same size circles over and over again, it didn't fall over, and it moved at a consistent speed. As for improving, I would try to cut the bristles more evenly next time. The sides were a little uneven, which made it more wobbly and easier for it to fall over. I would also re-add the pipe cleaner legs to add extra support. This also might affect the way that the Bristlebot moves. I would also find a better way to attach the bottom wire to the bottom of the battery. The toothbrush had a tongue cleaner on the back side, which had like a rubber rippley side, so it made it more difficult for the wire to directly touch the bottom of the battery.